doctor. And every patient that he ever examined, he put GP. He used to sign his initials GP on the patient's stomach. And tattoo.
Anyway,
Yeah.
we're going to learn the famous Matovu. Why is it famous? Because the Tzemach Tzedek would repeat this mimer every so often, even not during Tammuz. Cleaning the atmosphere. So one of the mimarim that he used, like the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe didn't repeat it so many times. This became the basis of the first chapter in Igeras Teshuvah that we're now learning in the Chitat. Right, the first chapter, he brings 4 psukim. So these 4 psukim about teshuvah, even though you don't notice, because he strings them together. Almost, 3 of them sound like they're one pasuk. They're really the 3 different psukim, and there's one that he notes in separately. Shuvah Yisrael ad Hashem Elokecha. And those 4 psukim correspond to 4 types of teshuvah, or 4 stages in teshuvah. So why are we talking about teshuvah now? Because there's a famous thing that from Balak and on, in Likutei Torah, we talked about this in previous years also, the Maimarim always contain something about teshuvah. But this Maimar is entirely about teshuvah. Again, Matovu Alecha Yaakov. And it's an achana for Elu, for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And in the last few generations, there's been an acronym that's been done for Tammuz. Why start in Tammuz? Now we're only in 10th day of Tammuz. So I think the earliest, it's a new thing. It's probably the last 100 years. So it's the Tammuz is Rashei Tevot. It's an acronym for Zmanei Teshuvah Memashmeshim Vebeim.
Where do you get that from?
Huh?
Where do you get that from, Tammuz?
That's the Rashei Tevot. Zmanei Teshuvah, Zayin Taf, Mem Vav is Memashmeshim Uveim, are approaching. The times of Teshuvah are approaching. And I said anyway that after this new government, I'm going to talk more about mitzvahs anyway. So this was the best option.
Maybe Bennett will do teshuvah. Maybe your friend Bennett will do teshuvah. Jewish don't give up, man.
So
What was your name?
So the Alter Rebbe said this mimer originally right after he came to Liadi on Yud Zayin Tammuz, on the 17th day of Tammuz of 1802.
Yud Zayin Tammuz?
Yeah.
So the Alter Rebbe also did the Igros, the teshuvah.
You mean?
There's a special Indian of giving Devai sodas.
Yeah, of course. This was about teshuvah. Again, that's where it started. During the fast day, you say that's from the Gemara. The Gemara says that. So when we read this, we're going to see that there's 3 types or 3 stages of teshuvah. Okay? But there's really 4. As we go through it, we'll see how you split the third one into 2. The Rebbe has a long explanation about it. I'll just read quickly. This is from Likutei Sichos. This is such an important mimer that's been discussed again and again and again and again. It's everywhere, especially since it's in the Tanya, and basically a lot of the Tanya is based on this mimer. Mitzvah Teshuvah in Derech Mitzvosecha is also based on this mimer. Almost every time that Teshuvah is discussed in Chabad, this mimer comes up. This essay comes up. So the Rebbe says, interestingly, in a Sicha on Arba Kosos, on the 4 cups, on Pesach.
Which chelik is that?
Yud Aleph. This is the Chelik Yud Aleph of Likutei Sichos. מבואר בליקוטי תורה שיש 4 מדרגות בתשובה. It says in the Likutei Torah that there are 4 stages or levels of teshuvah. והן מרומזות בכתוב, and they are alluded to in the very famous verse that appears in Tehillim, chapter 34. Sur mera v'aseh tov, refrain from evil and do good. Bakesh shalom v'rodfeu. You should ask for peace or wholeness and seek it. סור מרע, שלא יפגום בעוונות גשמיים במחשבה, דיבור ומעשה, וצריך לעשות תשובה להתחרט על העבר ולעקור את רצונו מן הרע, שלא ירצה להיפרד מייחודו ואחדותו יתברך, אלא שיהיה גילוי אלוקות בבחינת ממלא כל עלמין. So the sur merah, which means to refrain from evil, that's the first stage, and it means to leave, to stop hurting yourself or hurting the world with the actual sins that you do in thought, speech, and action. And that disconnects you from God. V'aseh tov, and do good, that's teshuvah on not having done enough of the mitzvahs, of the prescriptive mitzvot aseh. Le'ageh et atzmo b'torah v'tfilah, and this is especially in things like such as learning Torah and davening. וכדי שיעשה תשובה שיתמלא גם האור שחסר בביטול מצוות עשה, אז זה צריך לעשות תשובה עצומה. להתקשר לדבק בשם הוויה שהוא סובב כל מיני מבחינת מקיף. ושני בחינות תשובה אלו הם בחינת תשובת התא. So these are the two lower stages of tshuva, and they correspond to Vav K, to the two end letters of God's four-letter name. Bakesh Shalom, but now we come to the higher Yud K, which is the third and fourth stages, and there it's to seek wholeness. What does it mean to seek wholeness? ובחינת תשובה הילה שהוא על ידי התורה שמשים שלום בפמליה של מעלה ובפמליה של מטה ודרכי נועם וכל נתיבותי השלום, שעל ידי זה מגיע לעצמות אור אינסוף שלמעלה מסובב כל מי ומלא כל מי. So if the first two are the pnimi and the makif, meaning to refrain from doing evil, that fixes the light that integrates into the person, and to increase in doing prescriptive mitzvot, that fixes the makif, the surrounding light, then the next two stages are what's above them. What's above them is already Or Ein Sof, is the infinite light. That's above both the Memala and the Sovev. And there are two stages. And here the Rebbe says, Keneged Nigled Torah Upnimiyut Torah. It means to learn Torah with Pnimius. You can learn the Nigle also with Pnimius, meaning that you want it to affect you, want it to understand it, and even the Dati. And so you learn either the revealed tradition or the concealed tradition. These are the two stages that make up the Bakesh Shalom V'Rodfeo, seeking wholeness or peace and pursuing it. And so those are the four stages. So you have four different verses in the beginning of the Igeras Teshuvah that they correspond to these four stages. Okay. So let's see it inside the essay. Ma tovu alecha Yaakov. How pleasant are your tents, Jacob. להבין מאמר הז"ל, כל הקורא לאברהם, אברהם עובר בלאו שנאמר, ולא יקרא עוד שמך אברהם, אלא מעתה קורא ליעקב יעקב ואחי נמי, שאני התם דעדר עדר יקרא. So he says, Avram was called Avram, and you're not allowed to call him again Avram. You can't go back. But by Yaakov, you no longer call him Yaakov because it was called Yisrael. Says the Gemara says no. Why? Because we see that the Shem even calls him Yaakov after that.
Immediately afterwards.
Okay, so he has both names. Why does he have both names then? Why is it both Yaakov and Yisrael? והעניין, שאי אפשר לבוא ולהגיע למדרגת ישראל, כי בהקדימות תחילה מידת ומדרגת יעקב. Because Yisrael, as we saw last week, means that he competed with Elohim. He conquers the world, the illusion that the world gives you, that there's only nature, there's only Elohim, there's no Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei. So he reveals, Yisrael means that he's able to reveal that everything is godliness. But in order to come to that high state, you have to first go through Yaakov. Every person has to be Yaakov first. And by Yaakov it says that his interactions with Esav, which represents the evil inclination, in two things he stopped him, meaning that there are two different stages or levels of being Yaakov. And that's what we just talked about, what we just saw in the Rebbe's short statement there, that these are sur merah v'aseh tov. It's both to refrain from evil, not to listen to the evil inclination and do something negative, and also not to listen to the evil inclination and to do something positive. And those are the two vayakveini ze pa'amayim, that he stopped me, he halted me twice. ולהבין זה צריך להבין תחילה הקושיה, למה ירדן שמע לעולם הזה בכדי שתקבל שכר אחר כך בגן עדן, לא קודם ירידתה הייתה בוודאי בגן עדן, והייתה נהנית מזיו השכינה. ומה היתרון על ידי ירידתה? So first we have to understand why the soul came down into the world in the first place. Because you were already in the Garden of Eden. When you were in the Garden of Eden, how much higher can you go? So what do you say?
Shem sent it down.
Can, but why? What for? It's a descent, but it's a descent. You lost the state that you had before. There's many different explanations for this. But really in the end, the most important explanation is what the sage just said. Here it's calling the world of Gan Eden, the world of Garden of Eden, the world to come. It's not talking about the world of the resurrection. It's talking about the state of the soul without a body. So it says 1 hour of teshuvah, of returning to God, u'ma'asim tovim, and good deeds in this world is better than all the world to come, meaning all the world of Gan Eden. And really what they mean to say, according to this, is that in the Garden of Eden, somebody who's already been down in this world is in a higher state. If he did teshuvah down here in this world, then a soul that's never come down. Because a soul that's never come down is called a tzaddik gamur. Relatively speaking, it's never sinned. Why? Because it's never been in a physical body. But the soul, that's why everybody yearns to come down when they're there. They say, how did you reach that? How did you get so high? It went down into the world. And they talk to it's false advertising, right? Because they don't tell you have to get to that stage. You're going to have to go through 70, 80, 90, 100 years of tremendous hardship. Yeah. In any case, so the souls before they came down into the world, they're certainly perfect tzaddikim. They're perfectly righteous. So this is not even talking about in our world that about teshuvah is higher than a tzaddik. That's not the meaning. He says the meaning is very simple. In the Garden of Eden, the soul who came down into the world and did teshuvah in this world is considered to be higher than any soul that never came down. Now he says there are 3 types of teshuvah. So basically what he's doing is he's taking the last 2 stages that we talked about, Yud K, and since they don't separate ever, the Yud K, they're 2 companions that never separate, the Chochmah and Bina, or in this case, the Nigla and Nistar, as we saw in the Rebbe, the revealed tradition and the concealed tradition. So they're 1. So really you have 3. How does it work? So there's 3 stages of teshuvah. The first is a teshuvah tatah sheyeh sulmera. The first is the lower teshuvah, right? Again, the whole Igeras teshuvah in the Tanya is based on teshuvah tatah and teshuvah ilah, right? And he gives the examples. There are sins that the Zohar says there's no teshuvah on. Won't repeat which ones they are. So you can't do teshuvah there. So what is the only way to?
You can do teshuvah there.
But you
say
can
that to stop you doing teshuvah.
So the Zohar says that. He says because the Zohar is saying that halacha only deals with the lower teshuvah. Meaning, if you learn the nigla, if you learn the revealed tradition, or even the concealed tradition, but from the perspective of halacha, there's no way to do teshuvah about certain things. Simple answer is because it's not an avera. So you can't do teshuvah. But we know that it's asur. So how can it not be an avera and it's asur? It's very complex. So I'll tell you what. In the end, the only way you can really do teshuvah on it is it's really asur. It's really forbidden. It's not an avera in the regular sense. You could just do regular teshuvah. You have to do teshuvah ilah. You have to do higher teshuvah. No, we're not talking about that. Things that are not an avera. Things that nowhere in the Torah does it say that they're forbidden. So I'm not going to repeat them now. So anyway, it's not important. But those you fix. No. So those you fix by higher teshuvah, by basically how he says in the Igeras teshuvah, by learning Chassidus. And the Chassidus is both about the revealed tradition and about the concealed tradition. It's a way of learning it that connects you back to your source. What he says in the Igeras teshuvah is that these averas, they're not these forbidden things, which are not literally averas. What they do is they disconnect you from yourself. And that's a very difficult thing because you haven't sinned against Hashem. You've sinned against yourself. It's much more complex. It's basically why people go to psychologists today. Right? So he says the only way you can fix that is by reconnecting to yourself. How do you reconnect to yourself? You don't go to a psychologist. That's not the right answer. That may help in some ways, but it won't really reconnect you. The reconnection happens by learning Torah from the perspective of Chassidus, from the perspective of the psyche, of how the psyche changes when it learns Torah. That's what will really reconnect you to yourself. Anyway, so the first stage, the first two stages are what we call tshuva tata, the lower tshuva. And that's the tshuva that Chazal deal with, that the Torah deals with. It's written everywhere, this is what you're supposed to do, and so on and so forth. And this is called sur mera. First of all, refrain from evil. B'tachlit. Completely. Shelo yifgom ve'avonot gashmiyim v'chashava dibur v'maaseh. First of all, don't do any sins. Again, Warren Buffett's first rule: don't lose money. Doesn't matter if you made money yet. First of all, don't lose it. Okay? That's a very important rule, right? Because if you lose money, you can't make more money. So the same idea holds here. Don't do things that are forbidden. If you do things that are forbidden, how are we going to do anything more than that? We're not going to make any profit in the world. So you have to be careful, first of all, not to do things that are forbidden, whether it be in thought, speech, or action. And if you have, so if you have, it's very simple. People overthink it. They make it too complex. They don't understand that it's the simplest thing in the world. All you have to do is stop. Don't do it. Stop doing it. That may not be so simple. Right now, stop. At this moment, stop. Don't do it now. Now that you're not doing it, what should you do? He says, regret the past and say that I don't want this. Even for the future, I don't want this. So even if I'm addicted to something, whenever you get a chance to stop. And you think it doesn't work, but over time it works. Because people are so desperate, they're so in despair. They're miyuashim. They don't understand that everything can be changed. And even if it can't, that's not the point of tshuva. Tshuva is not to make you into a perfect person. That's not its point. The tshuva is to say, this world is hard, there are difficulties here, I'm sorry, I regret that I fell because of these hardships, and I don't want to fall anymore. If 2 minutes later you do fall, do tshuva again.
Is he making it too simple?
No, that's as simple as it is.
You're saying that sur mera comes first, and only when you do that, you can then come to asay tov.
But we haven't talked about asay tov yet.
People are also doing good things, as well as doing bad things at the same time.
No, you can't do it at the same time. You can't do things at the same time unless you think that you're doing something.
You can give tzedakah. Yeah. You can give tzedakah. We're quite happy to go and have a tray for breakfast.
But that's after that. You don't do it at the same time.
In the same time, in the sense of that a person can live his life.
Of course, but that's how this world is. This world is mixed.
Doing good things and bad things.
Because life is mixed.
It sound like only when you got rid of all the bad things. Now they're all gone. We got rid of those.
No.
Now you can start doing good deeds.
No, that wasn't the meaning. The meaning was on the contrary. Don't take the bad as something so total that if you're steeped in some kind of avera that you can't stop, that you should think that that's it, my life is over.
You can't stop it.
Even if you cannot stop, because you're addicted, you're this, you're that, it doesn't matter. Tshuva is very simple. Tshuva says, stop now. If you can stop now for 2 minutes, can you stop for 2 minutes? And say, I regret that I did this, and I don't want to do it anymore. The result of that is, and that's why he wrote Igeres Tshuva. That's the first reason why he wrote it, because people thought that it's really difficult to do tshuva. So they thought that the way you do tshuva is by fasting. And that's what he writes in the Igeres Tshuva. He says, people think that the fasting is the tshuva. That if I fast, and fasting is hard, how long does it take? A whole day. You have to fast for a whole day. So it's at least, even if it's from sunrise to sunset, at least 12, 13, 14 hours. He says, no, tshuva is instantaneous. It's at one moment.
You were proving that from the Gemara.
And he shows it. And he says, the moment that you said, I regret, and you said with your lips, I don't want to do this anymore, as far as Hashem is concerned, it's over. It's finished. You will never, ever, in a million billion years, be reminded that you did this. It's finished. It's not like, I don't want to say your wife. It's not like you did something wrong and your wife remembers for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. It says, no. The moment that you say, I regret this, and the moment that you say, I don't want to do this anymore, as far as Hashem is concerned, it's finished. You will never, ever be reminded of this. It's that simple. That's why he wrote the Geras Teshuvah. That's what he's saying here. That's all you need to do.
If what you say is correct, then why is there faith in Shem either?
It doesn't. It only goes through those things that you didn't regret. They will never. It's signed, sealed, and written in the Gemara. It's written in the Geras Teshuvah. It's written in the Rebbe's Sichas. You will never ever be reminded about this ever again. It's gone from the world, as far as Hashem is concerned. But who said they're letting you back into the palace? You won't be reminded. They look at you and they don't recognize you, but you're not let in. So you live your life distant from Hashem. That's not a good thing. It's not like we went back to being good best friends anymore. Okay? It's just that this sin is not going to be, you're never going to be reminded of the sin again. It's finished. So a person has to say this as many times as he can during the day. If I did something wrong, even if I have an addiction, whatever it is, I'm sorry. I didn't want to do this. I'm not making excuses, but I regret that I did it. I did it out of my own free will, but I'm not making excuses. And I don't want to ever do this again. And if 2 minutes later, it happens to be that you don't. Again, here you need how to go from this state of regret and not wanting to do it anymore into a state where you really don't do it anymore. That requires more learning. And we're not going to do it here, as far as I remember.
What about the guy who does teshuvah when he's 27? He changes his whole lifestyle. But he doesn't remember all the things he did from the age of 10 to 20.
Doesn't matter. He says about all the things. And by the way, usually, if it was really something that had importance, it will repeat again. And then you'll remember. So when you remember that time, you say about all of the separate times that I did this, I regret that I did this, I don't want to do it anymore. It's that simple. It's finished. It's gone. And he says that's what we mean when we say Ki ata Baruch ata Hashem Salech. No. We're saying the bracha. What do we say in the bracha? This bracha is always the hardest to remember. Why? Because you need a lot of faith to say this bracha and actually believe it. And what do we say every morning? We say, Baruch ata Hashem chanun marbe lisloach. He's full of forgiveness. And it's finished. The Alter Rebbe says in the Geras Teshuvah, you have to believe that when you say this, it's really it's a real bracha. He says that's hard. That's hard for people. But that's what it is. It's that simple. The nonsense that the Christians created, it's just pashut nonsense. It just doesn't even begin. Well, we know about them because we're suffering from the nonsense that they created, right? They overthought the whole thing. They made it into something that it's not. They confuse psychology with godliness. They don't understand the difference. That through their whole history, that's been their problem. That they can't tell the difference between man and God. They just can't tell the difference. And so for them, God is just as vindictive as they are. So how do you change his mind? How do you get him to forgive you? Oh, it's so hard. No, it's not so hard. Hashem doesn't want a person to live in and with his sins. He wants him to get rid of them. He doesn't want to have to remember them. And the process is so simple, it takes exactly 2 seconds to do. But you have to do it. You can't count on the fact that in the book it says that the process is very simple. You have to actually say this. I regret what I just did, and I don't want to ever do it again. And you're finished with it. שלא ירצה להיפרד מייחודו ואחדותו יתברך כמו שנתבאר לעיל. Meaning, I don't want to be separate from you. I realize that what sins do is they create a barrier between me and you, between me and God. And I don't want there to be a barrier. וזה התשובה ובתפילה, על ידי אומרו ברוך אתה השם אלוקינו, And this we do when we daven 3 times a day. שהומשך בחינת אלוקינו בקרבנו, והוא בחינת ממלא כל עלמין. What do we say? ברוך אתה השם אלוקינו. Every bracha that we say, but specifically this one, ברוך אתה השם, חנון המרבה לסלוח. But every bracha that we say, that we make Havayah into our God, what we're saying is, we want to be connected to Hashem. And this is called the integrated light, the light that fills all worlds. כי דכתיב פרשת וילך, הלא על כי אין אלוקי בקרבי מצאוני הרעות האלה, וכתיב כי אם עוונותיכם היו מבדילים ביניכם לבין השם אלוקיכם, נמצא העוון ומסך מבדיל בין האדם ובין אלוקינו. So, when a person is living with his sins, he hasn't gotten rid of them, he can't see the godliness in the world. There's a barrier. That's what it literally means. I can't see beyond the superficial way that the world looks. ובמקום אחר נתבהר פירוש בעניין אלוקינו, שאומרים כאן השם אלוקים דווקא, והיינו כמשום שכדי להיות אלוקי בקרבי, שזהו פירוש אלוקינו, הנה זה אי אפשר כי אם על ידי צמצום. So now he gets into another topic. He says, what does it mean to make Hashem into Elokim? Okay. What does that even mean? She says that there has to be a tzimtzum, there has to be a contraction. What is this contraction like? Al derech tzimtzem shchinato ben shnei badei Aaron. The same way that God contracted himself, meaning he somehow pushed himself. It's not for me, is it?
Is your water delivery?
Sorry. What?
Is your water?
No, it's not supposed to come today. God put his presence between the 2 poles of the ark. There were 2 poles that they carried the ark with. And so somehow he contracted all of himself between those 2 poles. And this is a whole topic in and of itself. There's a few different places that Chazal say in Yuma. We just learned in the Daf Yomi, I think 2 weeks ago, that God can, that mu'at machzikat merubeh. The small space contained a lot. So this is one of those spaces, one of these instances. The lichora no muvan, because it's hard to understand. What do you mean? He contracted himself, his shechina, his presence, between the 2 poles of the ark. Hashem fills the entire world. Everything is Hashem. As we said. So when it comes to fitting himself into the world, you don't say that he contracted himself, because the world also is a small space relative to God. So, what's going on here? So why does it say so about the poles? What's the difference? There's no difference if you say between 2 poles or you say the entire earth. It's the same thing relative to the infinite, right? אך העניין הוא כי הגם שנאמר את השמיים ואת הארץ אני מלא, אם כל זה אינו מאיר בהם בבחינת גילוי, כי מבחינת ההיעלם, אשר נקרא סתימו דכל סתימין. The difference is that when you say that Hashem is in the world, He's everything, you don't mean to say that He's revealed, because I can't bow down to the tree, and I can't bow down to the heavens, and I can't bow down to the universe even, which is even contracted relative to godliness. Okay? So there, God is concealed. It's called stimu dechol stimin. It's called the concealed of all concealments. Aval ben badei Aaron, but when we're talking about Torah, which is what the poles, what's between the poles? Between the poles is the ark itself. What's inside the ark? The Torah, and the luchos, and the tablets of the covenant. So there, haya oroy barach mitgaleh b'bchinat gilui. There it was revealed. Okay? And we talked about this, that there's 2 types of concealment, of contraction. We talked about this many times. There's contraction in nature, where God is concealed. And there's contraction in Torah, which means that God is revealed through limited letters. Each letter is rich and filled with infinity. But in nature, though everything is godliness and everything has infinity as its substance, it's not revealed. You can't get it out of there. You can't look at nature.
Also not revealed until you
Of course it is.
start to work on it.
Settle, well, but it's there. You start working on nature, you won't find the infinite. That's the whole point.
No?
You won't find godliness. You can't. That's the whole thing. Because nature conceals godliness.
You can see that Hashem is running the universe. You can see
You
it.
can't see it. You can think it. You can believe it. You can't see it. We know so much about the physical universe now. Nowhere do we find Hashem's name. Nowhere do we find that Hashem is creating something. We don't see it anywhere. In the end, it's faith. It's belief. Because nature conceals God. The Torah reveals God. So they're both types of contraction. But the contraction within the Torah is what we call concentration. You took the great thing and you concentrated it. And now, every time you taste it, you touch it, it's very, very, very sweet. But nature, you can touch it as much as you want, it's not sweet. It's always concealing God. So we talked about this many times. והוא כמו שמבאר במקום אחר שבאלוקות אין שייך כלל עניין הסתלקות והתפשטות כי אם עניין העלם וגילוי. Remember? So here it is. So now he gives the two terms in better ways than we've been saying them until now. That when it comes to godliness, you can only talk about revelation and concealment. Heilem v'gilui. That's why the world of emanation is all heilem v'gilui. But our world, nature, the three lower worlds, Bria, Yetzir, Asiya, creation, formation, and action, they are what we call istalkut v'itpashtut. It's either contracting or expanding. Extending. Okay? שבאמת את השמיים וכולו אני מלא, רק שהוא בבחינת ההלם. Really, Hashem is everything there is in nature. But it's all concealed. אכן בין בדי אהרון היה מאיר בבחינת גילוי. But between the poles of the ark, meaning inside the ark, when the ark was in its place, you saw godliness. When you came to the temple and they opened the gates of the sanctuary, you couldn't see all the way inside because they didn't open the curtain for the inside. All you saw was, in the first temple, you saw the poles sticking out a little. And in the second temple, in the first temple you couldn't see anything at all because there was a wall there. The wall had an opening on one of the sides, but you couldn't see through it to the Holy of Holies. But in the second temple, there were two curtains, and you saw the poles sticking out a little. In the second temple, there wasn't the ark there. That's a question in the Gemara.
What were the poles?
What?
What were the poles?
So apparently, what I think the pshat is in the end that the poles they retained in some way. They did something so that it would look like the ark was there. Meaning they put poles there. I think they weren't the poles from the ark, because they can't be removed from the ark. They put something else that looked like poles. I think that's the pshat of what they mean there. Yeah, it's a very, very important question. What did you see? In any case, you couldn't see inside. But it was enough that it was there. That's what the three last chapters of the Tanya talk about. Right? Memtet Nun Nun Aleph is talking about what it means when a person came to see.
To see and be seen.
He saw. What did you see? What exactly did you see? Okay. In any case, what we mean by it today is that when you learn Torah, what's inside the ark, then you see Hashem. What time is it? We have to end. Okay. Very good. So we'll continue tomorrow.